All right, let's get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to the December 1st PAB board meeting. And everybody online, thank you for joining us. We'll start off with introductions. My name is Larry Knox. I am the chair of the PAB, Police Accountability Board. Dr. Harrison.
I'm Robert Harrison. I'm University of Rochester Medical School retiree, and I occupy one of the council seats.
I'm Rabbi Dora Settle, and I have the Northwest Council seat.
I'm Ricky Harvey, pastor of Mount Olivet Baptist Church, and I occupy the mayoral seat.
Good evening. My name is Arlene Brown. I'm vice chair, and I have been appointed by the Alliance.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Cadet Senior. I hold one of the Alliance.
I'd like to thank our interpreters for joining us. So let's remember to speak clearly and not at our, as usual, super fast pace, so we can make sure our interpreters get everything so our audience can understand us online. First thing we have is approval of our minutes from the previous meeting. Sabrina emailed out earlier in the week again to us and today. I had one change. Anybody else have any changes to the minutes?
No change for me. And the change that you suggest.
Yep, just adding in our vote out of executive session. I mean, I can email this to you too after the meeting, but just in regards to termination of Dwyer Reynolds' employment with the PAB, that was a vote that we took. It passed 5-1. Abstaining were Rabbi Settle, Matthew Nikoloff, Reverend Nikoloff, and oh, I mean, not recused. Yeah, sorry. They weren't in the room, so they recused. And in favor were Knox, Brown, Tucker, Harvey, and Cadet. Harrison was against. And then after that, our second vote was hiring an interim director. And at the hiring of the interim director, our acting manager would no longer be acting manager, returning to the original position. Yeah, that was an excellent. Yeah, and then we also began to search.
Whatever you said, they could.
Yeah,
They couldn't hear.
no problem. Yep, hiring an interim director, a motion, and we would start that process. And once that person was hired, leaving Dwayne, our acting manager, Dwayne Bosco, of that position to return to his original position, while also beginning also the search for a full-time executive director, interim director first, and that was passed 7-0. Those are the only two votes we had in executive session. And just to reflect that, email those also. Any other, nothing? Okay, approval to,
I move that we approve the minutes.
second,
Favor?
all in favor?
Brown, Harvey, Settle.
Great. Staff reports. We're going to have a report from our on data transparency in a minute, but let me get mine out the way first. We also have an investigations report, which I would just read, and then we'll get to the updated data transparency and input sessions. But for the investigations division, I have a report. We have 232 reports in as of today, of which 211 are investigatable. This includes 5 cases from PSS. 111 cases have been assigned for investigation. We closed 19 cases at the last meeting. An additional 31 cases are in the process of closing, which should be complete by the next board meeting. We submitted 49 sources information requests to RPD today, and we'll track the timeline, the timeliness of their responses. 14 of the 49 source information requests are second requests for additional information on cases that the investigation division is working on. Ride-along is for the Board of Info Stone, and we are waiting available dates. That's a report from Wayne Bosco. I do want to remind the board to make sure we get our ride-along forms filled out. We have some tonight that we'll get out to you before we leave to make sure we all take part in them. All right. Next up is, yes, question.
Am I correct in understanding that none of the complaints that have been decided so far, none of them required review by the board?
Well, I mean, the only ones that we reviewed are the ones that weren't investigatable. Those are the ones that have come before us as a board. Everything else.
And we've not reviewed any of those.
Well, last meeting we did. Those only, just those 19 that we did the last meeting, ones that we got in advance. So those are the only ones that we reviewed. The ones that we went over at the last meeting. Those 19.
Just to make things a little bit clearer, we had gotten an email with the 19 cases that were, a couple of them were compliments, some of them were comments, and we had gone over those prior to the meeting. And at the meeting is when we voted by number, because none of those were anything that needed or could be investigated.
So that's what I'm getting at. So far, we've not done any cases that
Have been investigated
required investigation.
Right.
That's correct.
so far.
And the reason for that?
Well, we have to get them. Part of it, we have to do the disciplinary matrix. So some of those, we have to get that completed first. Others, there's more work to be done on the cases. And it was a sense of frustration that we mentioned at the last meeting about wanting to get more in front of us.
Well, my memory's bad, and I don't. If I don't remember what you said, I apologize. But what I'm getting at is, or what I'm trying to get at is, how many of those 200 and some odd cases are waiting objective information before they can be adjudicated?
We could, that's an email to that team to find out. I don't know the exact number. And there are ones, I mean, the ones, obviously the ones that they're doing source of information requests are ones that we feel, the team feels there's a need for more information. But out of the 200 that are, approximately 200 that are actionable, I'm not sure of the answer to your question.
Of the 200, you do have some idea how many have been requested, have had sources of information requested?
And that's, we can go back, I mean, Wayne's report on each meeting, how many source of information requests they've done. I don't have a running tally. I know there is in the report from today, these are additional ones, and there have been some before. So I mean, we could, I don't know the running tally total, but there have been numerous requests, and then some that had to be redone or were added on a second request.
Well,
I said, Melody had sent us a report prior to that with where the cases were, how many we had, what came in, and what their status was. And there should be, and it should be, I believe, in the last email that we got from her as to
but
where they are.
we still don't know when the first case is gonna come through
No,
that gets reviewed by the 3-person committee and gets voted on. We don't know when that's gonna happen,
not yet.
because none of those cases so far have enough information in them.
Possibly that, or there may be a bottleneck somewhere in the system between when the case was actually assigned a number and a person, and all of the various steps that have to be taken before it gets to us.
I mean, if we can, I think more so to get this exact answer to your question, we just put that in writing to the team. They can give us the, time frame for the first one is.
The hold up on what I would call the real cases. The hold up there is lack of information from the city.
I wouldn't put it all in the city. I mean, part of it's work that has to be done by us to reach out to witnesses to get the processes all set. There's a lot of work that, needs to be done in the investigation division, as we know. So I think for your specific question of a time frame for when the first case will come before us, if that's a question we can put in writing. I don't have the answer to that, but that's something we've constantly been asking about all throughout. And I don't have the answer, but that's something we can put in writing, get a more detail on. Just Tucker, introduce yourself.
I'm Danielle Tucker. I am the Alliance.
Update on data transparency. Everybody has a copy of the draft of the data transparency report in front of you. Yep, please come up. Jonathan gave us a lot of energy last week, but I want you to do it the way that you do it, either way.
Together we make one. I am me. Okay. Okay.
Well,
If
if only if they're
everyone-
comfortable. Do we know that the interpreters
I
here?
can hear you. She can hear you.
All right. So hi, I'm Sarah. Met mostly everyone, but for those listening online, I'm a policy and data analyst here at PAB. And here in the Division of Policy and Oversight, we currently have 2 projects that we're seeking feedback on from the community. And at the last board meeting, you heard Jonathan speak about the disciplinary matrix and that public input process. And now I'm here to speak about the process for police data transparency, which is a proposal for change. A proposal for change is a community and data-driven process where the PAB makes formal recommendations to change policies and practices that impact the Rochester Police Department. This document that you all have and that you can find on our website, it makes formal recommendations about the collection and reporting of information about what the police do. The data that RPD collects and reports should represent the needs of the community and should be available based on the needs of the public. So we are wondering what kind of data you all here and in the community would like to see RPD make publicly available. So that's the public input piece. And now I'll give just a quick brief summary of what the drafting of this proposal for change. So we used the Bureau Institute of Justice's Police Data Transparency Index as a framework. And we scored RPD on the availability and accessibility of information in 10 categories, including complaints about police misconduct, instances of officers using firearms, use of force, arrest data, calls for service, traffic stops, and crime reports. We found that the quality of RPD's data varies. There are some areas where they are leaders and others where no data is available. Overall, Rochester's score lands right at the middle of the 94 locations that were measured in Bureau's Police Data Transparency Index. And here's how you can submit feedback on the proposal for change. You can read the draft of the recommendations on rockpab.org. Anyone in the community can submit comments online through December 31st of this year. But we would also love to host feedback sessions with community organizations in person or virtually. And if you would like to connect about holding a feedback session on either data transparency or the disciplinary matrix, you can email pab@cityofrochester.gov, or you can call 428-9627. Oh, sorry. And then lastly, I have some details just for the board, which are that we've scheduled an input session with you all on January 12th. So we will have a deeper discussion there, and I really look forward to hearing everyone's feedback. I know I've gotten some of your feedback already, which I appreciate. And that's it.
It's 7 more minutes. I had a couple questions. If you want to say, we still want public input, obviously, so just my question is like determine where we're going to go. But I didn't want to, on page 3, we talk about based on the recommendations are based off what the data actually looks like. And you said based on the quality of existing RPD resources, such as the crime data set, is evident that RPD has the capital, technology, and raw data required to implement these recommendations. You can just give like examples of what they already are doing to show this wouldn't be onerous to
Yeah,
do something
for
different
sure.
where they're already kind
So,
of. showing they can do that
a really great example, if you want to go to page 8, where they have crime reports, or I have the crime report section. First of all, I will go in to talk about this, but I also want to say, like, I don't want to take away from your board business. Like, this is a,
This is- this is-
okay, all
Yeah.
right, great, yeah, like, this is definitely stuff that we're gonna discuss in, the January 12th feedback session as well, but I will give this example because I think it's great. So their crime reporting data are actually, that score of 70 would put them at like number 4 out of those 94 locations across the country that, that Vera indexed. And if you go to, the link is actually right down in the bottom of the footnotes. Like you can, I encourage you all to go and just check around what that really great resource looks like. When you first land on that crime page, they give you a little bit of their own analysis. They give you infographics and graphs. They give you searchable maps. And then what is the gold standard that I recommend in every single one of these sections is they make those data available for download. So in what's called a CSV file, which would allow anyone in the community, in the police department, just anywhere, you know, scholars, just anyone, to independently analyze information and see trends for them for their own self. So that's their best data.
Wouldn't be recreating the wheel then.
Right, yeah, so it would be really great if they could take each of these other content areas, which most of them, we know that they are collecting this information and putting it in their own databases. If they could make such a available data set like they have for that crime report, that would be phenomenal. And this is all stuff that doesn't just help for, you know, my job as a data analyst and like other people out in the community. It helps them, you know, analyze and more effectively do their own jobs as well.
And then- Add 3 more, but. Okay. And on page 5, complaints about police misconduct. You talk about PAB's officer required to release information about complaints. We do our own reporting. The data elements required by PAB are more extensive than our recommendations for RPD. So can you?
Well, that's, sorry,
no,
I don't want to take forever. Could you repeat
Yeah,
that?
so the data elements required by PAB are more extensive than our recommendations for RPD. So we're gonna be doing more than we're asking them to, which I think is always, like, but can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, well, it's listed in the charter. I don't have that section. I don't have the charter memorized at all. So, but each of those things are listed in the charter. I'm sorry, I don't have them on my.
But we have a long list of things that. we're
Yes,
gonna
we do have, it's like what
self-report.
you see, and so, Ms. Brown mentioned earlier the reports that you received from Melody. You receive like quarterly reports, and then you would also get an annual report. That's what this is referring to. All of those reporting elements that are in those reports that you get.
We're not asking them to do anything that we're not already gonna do ourselves, like. And then 2 more, sorry. Actually, I have a ton more, but these are like
That's cool.
prioritizing the ones. I thought I really kind of want to concentrate on, you know, the traffic pedestrian stop throughout 100, because people don't always realize, you know, there could be nothing written, but that's still a lot of engagement, especially with, you know, stop and frisk, you know, or things that are similar.
Yeah.
So the fact there is no resources to be located on the top of the traffic and pedestrian stops can you just expound a bit, like how that's a zero and why that's really important?
Yeah, so
Some
I
patterns.
actually, I will compare it to the one right above it on page 7 of calls for service, where they have a score of 31. That's actually, they have the most basic data available for calls for service, which is just, they tell you the number that they receive in a year. However many thousand calls for service they receive, that's what they report out each year. And that, just having that place to start alone gives them that 31 points. So that's like, that's not even available for traffic stops. They don't even tell us how many they do a year. But of course, it would be wonderful if we could break them down, like I said, in the crime data set, where they go incident by incident and give you a bevy of information about demographic information. So where did this happen? What was the person, both the officer and the person that they are having the encounter with? What is their race, their gender, their age, I guess said the location. So we can look at that and see, are there patterns? Are certain groups of people having encounters that maybe lead to use of force more often? But since we don't have that available even to start with, we can't say what the patterns are, let alone go and make suggestions for making them better.
Do you know that's something that they collect internally? Like if there's a
That
stop?
one, I do not know for sure how much they collect. Do I use my colleague? Remember some training about traffic stops? Okay, sorry. So that one I don't know, but we will be having a session with RPD in hopefully the new year about just like we're doing here. So hopefully I'll get some feedback about that kind of thing. Can I go to Rabbi Settle?
It's not like an issue about traffic stop, which is anything that requires a gendering of someone in the public endangers trans people often. So before we have put out a policy that we want to require that, I think we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, so I would recommend looking into California's RIPA policy. They're kind of the gold standard of this collecting of demographic information, and they do collect information on trans status. So we would probably want to talk to them and I hear this concern, absolutely. But also, if we don't collect the information, we can capture the harm that's being done in the trans community. So we have to weigh all these issues. And of course, protecting people's privacy is like the utmost concern.
And that's appendix 2, what you just said, so we got that in.
Yeah, the RIPA, yeah.
I know Dr. Harris had a question, but I did want to, after your question, I wanted to ask you more about your statement.
Okay. The first one was, well, first of all, I don't misunderstand. Are you Mr. Jenks?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Why didn't you, I just wondered why you didn't express this data as so for instance, as percentiles. Would have been easier to grasp, wouldn't it?
Could you explain more about what you mean?
Well, just making a casual glance.
Okay, you mean this first chart about where I listed the high score?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's just, and people, yeah, I'm happy to, add that in. My goal here
that's a
on-
comment.
Okay, yeah, and I love it.
And the second one is a little more trying to make trouble. You mentioned something about these being values in terms of the police department and the community. The police department's collecting this, so what you expect them to collect from their best interest does not necessarily correlate with what you expect the community's interest to be.
Of course, that's why part of what we're doing here is I want to collect from the community. What are the community's values? So I say a lot of times in here that these things should reflect community norms. And then I also recommend, one of my overarching recommendations is that whatever data they do end up putting out, that they continually evaluate that, and we would hopefully work in partnership and part of that continual evaluation where community norms will change. And I've heard the police chief mention changing community norms. So it's something that is on their mind already. And we're going to always probably push them a little bit harder in the side of community. And we just have to be that advocate, I think.
I guess the thing that I was getting at is the more you can couch these values in terms of their meaning to the police, the more apt you are to find their concurrence. If they know that what you're talking about is something that matters to them.
So yeah, I think the example that I gave of the crime data set, I think that there's a reason why that's their best, most robust data set that they
Those are
provide.
Propaganda, part of the propaganda. Yeah, I agree.
What's a part of, what data set were you guys seeing?
They were very good at reporting crime.
That again?
Every little crime gets reported.
Gotcha.
It doesn't get missed.
Okay.
See what we have to, and let's see how hard this is. See how hard we're working.
Can I also respond to the first part about how I decided to report? So in this document that you have, my goal was for it to be the most engaging to the most nitty gritty, most engaging to the general public, to the person who's actually at RPE writing the programs. So that's the very end with your appendices. And the front is just tried to be an engaging chart. And I had to choose one metric to compare against. And I hear percentile. I've also heard, people would like to see medians. I agree with all of this, and I will make some product that has that. But I just had to choose something. And so I chose this high score just to show on page 2 to the general public in a quick way what's possible. Like not every one of these categories reaches 100. Like how far are we away from what's possible? Because I do believe that Rochester can implement what's possible in every category.
So that was the purpose of including the high score,
Correct.
to show the community and to show us what's possible. I understand the chart. I do get percentile, probably would have been a little bit easier to understand. If you're a numbers person, it probably would be easier. If you're a numbers person, percentile would probably be easier. I'm a numbers person, so it'd probably be easier to understand. However, this is fine too. I do have a question though. So when it comes to, I'm on page 4, by the way. So when it comes to use of force, and the RPD score is 0, they're doing great in other areas as well. Training, police contact information policies, even crime reports, 70, you're 11 away from the high score. But I'm trying to understand, like, use of force, 0 out of a 90. What?
0 out of 100.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
0. They have 0. The highest is Dallas Police Department with 90. So I know it's 0 out of 100 because it's percent, but 0 going from the number 1 spot is 90, correct? What will constitute someone getting a 90?
Yeah.
Like what goes, if you kind of understand, like what goes into getting a 90 when you're talking about use of force? How do you earn a score for use of force?
Well, it's not about use of force itself. It's about what, so every time they carry out use of force, they complete a subject resistance report, and they capture a lot of information on that subject resistance report about what led to the use of force and what did they do before, and of course, demographic information, like I mentioned, and that having that information captured somewhere that's available for anyone here in this room, that's what would get them the points. So if you look on page 6, is where the use of force section is, you'll see that number, so that like this paragraphs 2 and 3 give you like what would make it a good data set. Currently they have nothing.
So it says like how how
Yes.
often and under what circumstances RPD officers use force.
Yeah,
So
so
when they get 0, that means that they don't use it often.
it just means that they don't tell us anything
Oh,
about
they're
it.
not reporting it.
Right.
Okay, that's,
Well, they-
that's what I'm trying
They
to say.
are reporting it somewhere. They report it to the FBI. And which is how we know that in this particular instance, they do collect a lot of rigorous information, which is listed as Appendix 1. So this is all the information that they're collecting and reporting to, it's on page 13, right? This is all the information they're collecting and they're reporting this on the regular to the FBI. So we know that they're not like typing out in an email every single one of these things. We know they already have a database. So what we're asking is take away any identifying information to protect people's privacy, and then make this information available, just like you make all that information about every single crime available.
Okay, all right, so I
And
get
that's
it.
like
So-
what Dallas does already.
All right, so this is, so when it's 0, these are things that that they are not reporting they're not reporting for the Vera to pick up. However, they are reporting it to the FBI.
Yeah.
All right, I understand that. My section was, to what point were you making the don't disclose the gender on stops?
Okay, so in other words, if a police officer has to identify the gender of an individual that they're encountering.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, okay, so trans people get misgendered quite a lot, but also because of the social attitudes, because of depending on the situation or whatever, it can create a situation which then becomes dangerous for that transgender person to be identified as transgender, or for the police officer to not be able to gender them, or to require that person to disclose whether they are transgender or not. So in terms of sort of how that is set up, right? So you have to be, again, I understand that it's important to have certain kinds of information, but you also, you know, in terms of what we require officers to do to sort of understand what that might result in, or.
Of course, I love that this could also support training and policies, because I'm looking at back on page 14. Earlier I mentioned the California RIPA data collection, which is kind of a gold standard in police reporting of demographic information. So element number 5 is the gender of the stopped person as perceived by the officer. So that could be coupled with a policy and training of collecting this information that never, like, don't put someone you're stopping in a situation where they have to disclose. And, you know, maybe we could take this all out, but just after like careful consideration. And I know that they have had this topic of conversation in implementing in California. So my first guess on things is always to go to the people who are already doing the work. And we have met with some people who from a lab at UC Irvine, who are the people who are tasked with measuring California's implementation of this RIPA data collection. I would happily go back to them and ask more follow-up questions.
My question was because I didn't understand the danger that they would be in. So thank you for answering, because it kind of, you know, widened my perspective, because I'm gonna be honest, I was really thinking like, what danger could they be in?
Well, look what happened in Colorado Springs on Trans Remembrance Day, right? There's bias against other folk, all sorts of folks that certain populations have, right? So
That's true, and I was
get to know,
wondering,
like, you know, oh, I don't like that you look this way, so I'm going to treat you the way that maybe other people are afraid of being treated by other folks too.
I definitely, I totally understand that. I just always think of it as like, when we're talking about that, race as well. Because as a Black woman, or as a Black person in general, you know, like, if it's dangerous for you to state your gender, is it dangerous for me to state my race? Because people be like, well, obviously you're this, you know, so just kind of going on perspective. But thank you for sharing that, honestly.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up for sure. Sorry, first of all, sorry I'm late. The traffic was back all the way up back to Jiva, and it took me 20 minutes to get from Jiva to here. It's crazy. And so sorry if I missed anything disclosed, but first part of the question, was there any conversation about how we'll disseminate the findings of this really awesome report to the public? Like, will you guys be working with public relations and others to make like infographics and some sort of like, let's get this out there, because obviously the police aren't letting people know how much they're not covering and disclosing.
What you've seen on social media is what we're doing with public affairs.
Okay, because it'd be great. I would love to see like some of your graphs and some of the, we can break it down even more so that, I mean, I wish some people were as outraged and we're at a meeting like this talking about this kind of stuff as much as they were at our last meeting about things, because the RPD is not reporting public data about their use of force. And we just settled a $12 million lawsuit about the use of force that led to the murder and the death of a particular individual, right? So I hope people would be disturbed about that. I hope the media would be concerned about that. I hope that this kind of stuff would get out there. And that further shows when certain people in the community want to question, why do we have all these staff? Why do we do all these things? Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? Well, Sarah just did something for the community of Rochester. Our staff, which is part of the legislation, is not just when you're starting to hear cases, when you're going to start hearing complaints. It's also what's not being said. What other parts of the ecosystem of the RPD are failing? And how can we get that information out to the public? So like Sarah's work and then engaging the public is a great example of why we need staff, of why it's worth funding this thing, and why it's worth reading the entire legislation of the PAB and not just the part that we like, which is like, are we hearing complaints or not? Because in the past 6 months, Sarah has just done a really amazing job of bringing up a lot of this data, right? And showing some of the ways that the RPD is not being accountable to the public. And our job is to cover policies and procedures and all those things as well. So I think I would just hope that our legislators and other people, when they are considering budgets, when they're considering why is the PAB not doing anything, would take a look at this report, which has been available for public comment, which has been available for people to see just as much as any of the other stuff that's been going on in the news with this agency. And I hope that that would be more important to people sometimes than some of the other stuff that goes on. So I appreciate that. So I'd say that not as a diss to public affairs, I think we should be getting more of this stuff out. I think it'd be great to see these findings get out there and get people upset about it and or it move to action. Which is
Or
great.
engagement to help
Engagement,
shape
yeah.
what this report's gonna look at.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Wouldn't that be an appropriate topic for the board to discuss as a policy matter? How when and how a report like this should be distributed?
I mean, we're in the public comment period, so it's out there for people to comment on and ask, like Sarah mentioned, and Jonathan, when he came in last week, about people putting their input in it. And then once it comes to us, we have to finally approve it. And then once it goes through that approval process and whatever we want to add or subtract or have further conversation with the public about, definitely we should talk to public affairs and the whole team and the whole PAB about how do we get this out there? How do we, put pressure on to make the changes if they're not happening after the conversations? It may take some more pressure for some of these changes that are recommended to eventually become policy. But that would have to be a major, that's a campaign to make sure that happens.
And then, can I add something also?
Go ahead.
So for this document, this was our first something that we called a proposal for change, which is a process that I learned of from the operating rules. And that is one of we're supposed to put out 6 of these in terms of our budget KPIs every year. So the process that I did in collecting this information, going into public feedback, disseminating, like making the page 2 notice, like this is all drawn out in the board's operating rules. And I think we do, in addition to the January 12th meeting that I mentioned earlier, we have some other meetings that we're going to be coming to between policy and oversight and the board. And I think I would love for us to have just more discussions and like you can clarify what we're seeing in the operating rules, because there are a few gaps when we filled in things that maybe could be better or, but we haven't had a chance to discuss that. So I'm excited to hear all of that process laid out from the board.
And one last question in case anybody else has any others.
I just want to say, I think the document is pretty good. Like, you could tell that you definitely put thought in it, and it's very, it's readable, it's understandable. The board asking questions just more so we can understand it overall, or I can understand pieces of it. But it's a really good document. It's readable. You explain each of the categories. So great job. Is this the first one of the 6 that we need that you need a year?
We also have the matrix and the body worn camera.
So the matrix, the protest policies,
You have
yes.
6 of these, though, 6 of these reports? Yeah, so this is the first one?
No. Well,
Well, so the disciplinary matrix is a different kind of document. It is not anything else that the Division of Policy and Oversight will be carrying out going forward, because that's a one-time document. And then, of course, I think it will be evaluated and updated on a regular basis, but that's separate from the rest of our like KPIs and goals.
So how many, you said the KPI is 6. How many have you completed to get to that goal?
So this is the only one that's out in public comment right now, but we have, other work that is going on that we will be discussing at those
Yeah.
meetings in the future.
Well, that protest policy.
Yeah, so and the protest policy is, I think, probably in the update last week, Dwayne would have mentioned that we are working on updating that one. So
Yeah.
I think I'm going beyond the
The
scope
point
of what
that-
I'm supposed to.
Yeah, the point that I was making is that it's good for your.
Yes, I'm.
Give it up for Sarah and the team.
Sir, one quick last question, and I'm sorry, I should have done before the clapping. But just, I know, and this isn't, I don't know if this is something that we can look at. I know there's been problems in other police departments across the nation, what they actually report to the FBI, or if they even report. Is there a way for us, I'd like to assume that our department is doing a good job of reporting fully to the FBI where other departments aren't. Is there a way to figure that out, or?
There is a way. So I did mention that the FBI gives out data about who submits data, like very meta. But so we know from the FBI that Rochester submits use of force data. We also know from the FBI that Rochester does not submit another kind of data, which is on crime reporting. It's called it's like incident-based reporting, which is like, I think only half police departments or half of law enforcement agencies in the United States do that. So the FBI is considering just like scrapping the program. So that's an unfortunate thing, but it turns out that with that specific data set, that happens to be the crime data set. So that's one that Rochester, they're doing fine. But yeah, so we know that they're reporting some to the FBI, some good stuff, some great stuff, and other stuff they're not participating in.
Since I wasn't here before, and I know you probably plugged it, but we can't say it enough. I think the good work being done by our staff, despite a lot of the concerns they've shared with their working conditions, is just another reason to ask the mayor to recognize the union.
I was gonna do that too, but hey.
And I say I wasn't here, so I didn't know, but we can say it more than once, because the mayor needs to hear it more than once until he does it.
I agree. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And
How many more community input sessions are gonna happen for the upcoming year?
Before the end of the year, did you say?
The new year.
Oh, in the near, not sure, and hopefully more than are scheduled. So at this point, tomorrow I am presenting to our staff. So that's technically a community input session. And then we've got the PABA regular meeting coming up at the end of the month. I'll be presenting to you all in January. And then hopefully we'll get some more community organizations on board coming up. And then we also have one live on the internet on like December, Marina, you know that? December 14th. Okay. December 14th, I think, is online.
Would you like us to try to get other organizations?
Yes, please.
involved and-
Yeah, I will send out my kind of email blast that I've been sending out to organizations, and Jonathan's been doing it too. We've been both kind of reaching out to community organizations. Their project is on the disciplinary matrix, so we would love that. Thank you so much for offering.
thank you, Sarah. And you're welcome. report is next up. So one of the things I do want to mention, Sarah just went into it, but again, if you're watching online, you have a community group, you want a religious organization, or you have a neighborhood group, just, reach out and we can do a presentation. The team can come out, do a presentation for you. If you want copies of the report, it's online, you can read it. And there's also input you can do by emailing in. But please, this is something that we want your thoughts and ideas on. And, the time is now to help shape this document. Also, in regards to what Matthew just mentioned about the union, we've encouraged, the mayor and city council president to figure out the process of recognizing. They're still going through that process. So we again ask for that process to get going quicker. I know there's a dispute between who actually has the legal ability to recognize, which the council and legal are trying to figure out, and the mayor. So I believe they want to make it happen, but again, it's a lot easier and right to just recognize as opposed to making them go through an election where it's obvious that where the staff is on that, which of course being a union member that I support also. But I really would encourage, the powers that be to get that process figured out, or the help that's needed to help figure out what the legal opinions are around that, so we could get the workers recognized at union. In regards to our search for our interim executive director, we did at our last meeting, as I mentioned in the notes earlier, make a decision to move on and get a new interim executive director. Also, our intention was once that happened, we move on and have a new executive director and move on from our acting manager. When our acting manager has stepped back from that role, so right now the leadership team is, the managers in the office are working together, but obviously to be more efficient, you need one person in charge. And our goal at the last meeting we announced was to move on and try to get that interim executive director role filled before the end of the month, to have somebody announcing if they're not starting full time right then. That's still our goal, to have that process happen. I would like for that to happen before our next board meeting, that announcement to happen or be announced there. And I think we're well on our way to do that. One thing that we did, I've talked to people in the community about, and electeds and the staff is wanting input on either names, but especially qualities that we want in our interim. And we've got a lot of feedback, from people, and we're still looking to have that about the qualities that they would want in an interim executive director, and making sure that whoever we choose does meet those qualities. That work is really important, and we want to make sure that what the community is looking for, what the staff is looking for, is reflected in who we pick. So that we're really interested in, continuing to get that input, but we are on a very quick time frame of trying to get that position filled, and starting the conversations with the staff and with our new interim about what we look like going forward. Any questions on that? Of course, that's why I looked right at you, Dr.
No, I just, under ordinary circumstances, there'd be some structure to the organization to identify and the interim, not to mention the permanent executive director. What structure do we have?
Yeah, I think there's two different, those are kind of two different.
Is there a hiring committee?
The board is the hiring committee. I see us all, the conversations we've been having, separately and as a board, regards to who we would want or the people that we're looking at. I think our process for the interim, especially because of the quick time frame, and is different than what it would be for the full-time executive director. I see that as a broader process, more conversations, especially involving the staff and what that looks like, especially depending where we are 6 months down the line, as that search happens for who we bring in permanently. I see that as a much broader conversation, but I think for us, for the interim, and from what I see as where the majority of the members are, us talking, us having things brought before us, us having conversations with people, and then making a decision pretty quickly with somebody that meets the qualifications and the qualities that everybody has talked about. That is that process. That's the process. Ultimately, obviously, we're gonna have a vote, so it's not, you know, not just, you know, one of us choosing choosing the person, but, everybody's pretty been invested and engaged in the issue. And I see that as a process that's been working, you know, and getting input from outside, everybody's kind of brought in. Either we've been given ideas or thoughts or I've sought them out.
When does this committee meet?
If we go into executive session, that could be one of the conversations, so we'd be talking about a personnel matter.
So
But
it would just meet at the times that the board normally meets.
I think, well, we've had conversations, not as a majority of the board, but we've had smaller conversations as board members about, you know, with potential people and, you know, and conversations, you know,
Okay, all
online
right,
with
thank
each
you.
other, yeah. So,
Thanks.
but there is no other committee besides all of us talking. There's no other makeup of the board that's making any other decisions except what's, I mean, Arlene talked, we bring things back to everybody, but no other things besides that, no other bodies besides that. No other subcommittee. All right, committee reports, training committee.
All right, we have a training schedule through the beginning of February. So I thought, and Marina, I have a copy for you for the minutes. Let me people know. Oh, anyway, all right. So our next week on December 8th, we are going to have our review of the disciplinary matrix with the staff. December 22nd, no training. January 12th, we'll have our, what perhaps might be our final discussion on data transparency. I'm not sure, but please be sure to read the report and make any notes so that we can have questions and comments at that time. And then we're going to have an initial review of policy and oversight research topics, those 12 reports that have to happen each year. The staff has been thinking through what they think is most significant, but they also want to hear from the board about what we do. And then to sort of think about how we're going to evaluate the priorities for that. 26th, we have our final training with SMK on closing cases. So we will start doing that. And February 9th, we'll have a public meeting where we are going to actually vote on the priorities for policy and oversight research.
This is still keeping the every other week.
Well, right,
First
so, yeah, so the first and third Thursdays are our meetings, and the second and fourth are our trainings or education. So again, the 9th, because there'll be deliberation, it will be a public meeting.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And one thing that I think we talked about as the board, you know, we're a part-time board, but we have a lot of training we have to do. And that we're required to have and that we just need to have to be able to do the job fully. And obviously we have an opening on the board too, as a new person comes in. And that's one of the frustrations of not being fully, you know, we have an alliance seat that hasn't been filled. When somebody new comes on the board, it's a lot of work. It could be overwhelming, but it's especially overwhelming if we have a lot of training you have to do. And the longer we have an opening, that's more training that they're missing, let alone the work of the organization. Obviously, you can watch meetings and read the minutes and catch up. And I'm assuming anybody that joins the board has been following the work that's been going on, but for the training, which you have to be on the board to have, being fully, you know, having all of our seats filled, especially a seat that's been open for way too long, really is important. We get those filled so we can have the appropriate training. And when we get to the point, like Dr. Harrison mentioned earlier, of actually deciding on our panels and the cases, and people going through the training to actually feel comfortable doing the panel, it won't be everybody all at once necessarily. You know, we don't want to have just 3 board members ready. They're all the panels, you know, or 4 or 5 board members. We need to have 7, 8, 9 board members pretty quickly ready when we get to the panels and deciding on these cases to be fully trained and feel comfortable with what they're doing. So it's a tight schedule with our timing. And there may be a need maybe on a weekend to do extra training, which you have to talk about in advance, but really having a full board. So all of us are here to share that load is really important, which goes back to City Council approving that last alliance seat opening, especially now that you know, the report's done. we're moving in a different direction. And we really need a full board, and we need the laws followed that dictate that seat should be filled and voted on. So that's the direct connection to our training that we have to go through as a board and being fully up on our numbers. Any other question? Oh, so Joe, after February 9th, what do you foresee as other potential priorities for training?
Well, so we're still working through, obviously, the list mandated by the charter. And part of this is sort of a matchmaking exercise where we're working with CSSI through March, I guess now, March, correct? I believe so. Anyway, and so they're identifying the right people to do those trainings and their availability. So hope next meeting I should be able to give an update about how that's working. The other thing I want to say too, and I want to say this to the public as well, is there are 15 mandated areas of training in the charter, not to mention other things that weren't covered by the charter in terms of technical skills or things that have come. And many of those will require more than one training session. So in theory, we would have a full year training program as a volunteer board that already meets twice a month, right? So
Four
Huh?
times.
Well, we meet 4 times including the training, right? Exactly.
Four times a month.
Our regular meetings are already twice a month as opposed to once a month. Okay. So I hope that part of what we can work with our interim director, and to sort of figure out the next step is to create a combination of sort of in-person and self-study kinds of materials or online materials so that we aren't, in a situation where we just never stop having meetings in that way or training. And also, as you said, so that their materials available so the people who come on board don't need individual training or whatever.
Or
We
less
have
of
to
it.
have a more sustainable model. So,
And also, and this was one of the recommendations in the report, which we, are going to address many of them, or not all of them, but also board trainings for us as a board to do better work as a board. Because obviously, as a board, we do better. And there's board trainings out there. Dr. Harrison's brought that up before with some possible places, and others have brought us names. So obviously, we want to work with our new interim to do that. But as board chair, definitely we all to get some help in doing our job better as board members. And there's trainings out there for that. That could be one time a certain issue and continuous as we work as a board also. So that's a lot of time, obviously, but something that needs to be done, and definitely figuring out what mix we can have so we could fit it in, I think is really important. I do want to acknowledge that it's training on how to do the work, but also training on how to be a board member too.
I do have one question. When the report came out, it did have recommendations for additional training for the board, along with all the other stuff that we already have training sessions about. And I was wondering if there was one or two things that are a priority that we can incorporate in what we already have established, so that we're not ignoring the recommendations that were put out by the report.
So the one thing I would say is there seemed to be a misunderstanding or misapprehension in the report that we had not begun the mandated training. Okay, so I do want to clarify that we've been doing them all along. But I think things like, for instance, the city code of conduct is an example of something that we should prioritize. And some of those other sort of key areas that they brought up in the report. Yeah.
Now that we did the open meetings law training, I think last
Right,
month.
we did, that's right.
Was one that we did too.
And that was on the report.
Mhm.
So that was one that we had completed, but it was on the report. But it's also like the timing of the report when it came out, you know what I mean?
There's
If we
one-
had just did the training like a month before or something, so it could have been just
Right, well,
Yeah.
it may not have been something that we didn't know, or
yeah,
they did not.
yeah, they
know.
didn't know that.
Which is very possible. But one of the things that I felt that I got very blindsided with was the sexual harassment. And I would like very much to see get some additional training in how to handle those kinds of things.
Well, I think that comes up again with the code of conduct and the, you know, decisions. And again, and I want to emphasize too, again, in case there's a misunderstanding, that our role as the board is not to investigate HR complaints. Our role as the board is to know when to refer them and to make sure things go through proper channels and procedures.
Thank you.
Thanks for community reports. The public input process, but I talked about that, and that was part of the chair's report. Any old?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Suppose we really have, I know I'll get into trouble when I say this. But,
Don't say it.
Don't make it happy, Bob.
We'll get you in trouble.
But we really have two major arms as I see it. One is the investigation of complaints, and the other is the investigation of police policies and procedures. And I really admire what Ms. Jenks, am I right? What Ms. Jenks and the rest of that group have done. So policy and procedure is actually showing up. I mean, it's not fading. I still think something's wrong with investigation, and that needs to get straightened out, because there should be somebody coming out the end of that pipeline by now, and getting adjudicated, and that's not happening. But those are the two things that really constitute what our main focus, I think should be.
Are you talking about I'm asking for clarification because I thought about something similar, but are you talking about the structure of the organization? Being that right now is structured into 6 different divisions. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if they call it bureaus or divisions. Divisions, are you saying that we should just focus on two divisions?
Not all divisions have the same impact.
Okay, gotcha.
Is what I'm saying. They're important.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm not trying to imply that they're not, but when I think if you were to go and ask one of your colleagues about this, they would talk about either the investigation of police misconduct, or they talk about why police misconduct occurs, or those would be the things that I think that they would spend most. I forgot my point now.
I think your point was you were probably trying to shed light on. I may be wrong about this, but you're saying that the policies and procedures division have been showing up and have been displaying their progress, but you haven't seen much from the investigations department?
Well,
I assume it's related to training somehow.
also that we haven't, there's a policy and procedures committee. And that's not reporting.
That's true.
Okay, so I'm sorry, right now we're talking about training. That's the part of the agenda we're on, so.
No, he finished that.
No business now, we're no good.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's why I
I'm sorry, okay.
interjected at that point.
What?
Serious.
Yes, Siri, come through.
Okay.
Never happened.
That ever happened to you before?
We should add AI to the policy concerns.
That is a topic for future discussion.
I would nuance what Bob is saying, though, is that no one in the community will be talking about anything if we don't also do what the charter says we're required to do, which is to be in dialogue with and having public meetings and all the things that a lot of the other divisions of the staff are doing too. So they all fit together, right? And I hear what you're saying. Those are like the important things, right? But like maybe what?
Maybe that's what I'm saying.
Well, no, I'm fleshing it out a bit more because I think it runs the danger of going along with the narrative some people the community waterfront, that we don't need all this staff, that we don't need all this stuff that we do. And I think they're all very integral together. And those might be like the heavy hitters, but you still have the people who need to get the word out, who need to organize, who go out and
Okay,
go
but
to things
I
on
was-
Saturdays and all that kind of
I
stuff.
was getting I'd like the policy and procedures committee to show a little life.
Definitely talk about that.
There's some policies and procedures that need to be looked at that haven't been discussed yet.
Well, that's what we're doing
On the 12th, that's part of the 12th.
on the 12th.
Yes, Bob, prior to the 12th, the subcommittee on policy and procedures will be meeting, looking, discussing, and fleshing out things that are important. And thank you for the shakeup.
Any other
Not
old-
afraid.
any other old business? New business? All right, I'd like to make a motion that we move to executive session to discuss personnel matter regarding the discipline, termination, promotion, or potential hiring of a specific person, and also potential litigation. So move. Thank you. So we're saving money by not doing all of it.
Don't save money on that.